Do I go first? Do you go first? Do I go?
I'm just waiting for the siren to stop. I think the worst part about doing a podcast right next to a hospital is that you have a bunch of participants that may be dying to be on.
Oh, Darkle, man. Darkle.
You are listening to The Soapbox. I'm Paul.
And I'm Eric.
This all started out with a list. What's that all about?
So I've compiled a list over the years of things that just bother me, things that grind my gears. And I shared that list with you.
And I thought, you know what? That would make interesting conversation. Sometimes I'm going to want to agree with you, and it's just going to be something we talk about. Other times, though, I'm going to want to steel man the opposite position because I think that's just interesting conversation.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm always right, but Paul's just a really good debater.
Hey, what is a scooter?
What is a scooter?
If I said to you, I'm going to take a scooter into work today, what have I communicated to you?
I mean, 10 years ago, I'd have assumed you were getting on like your kid's Razor scooter, right?
That's what was fashionable at the time.
Yeah. You know, when I was a kid, I guess they were like a Veriflex. Had one with more like bike tires, right? Inflatable.
I don't remember the Veriflex. I would have thought maybe like a Vespa, 20cc engine.
Yeah. Oh, that's a scooter?
Smaller.
Okay.
That's often referred to as a scooter. It might be a jazzy scooter, an assistive device. It could be the Razor scooter. But the one that really grinds my gears, the thing that has annoyed me since they came to campus in, 2021? Mm-hmm. Well, I guess pre-pandemic, 2019, and then it went away and it came back in 2021, are these electronic rental scooters. They absolutely drive me nuts. Mm-hmm. And I want to lay out a case, and I want to see if you can find a counterpoint to this, or maybe we are just commiserate. Oh, do you hear that siren?
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody just got hit by a scooter just now, I'm sure of it.
So we should maybe clarify for folks that don't, I mean, if you don't live in a city that has these now, you're probably under a rock, but these are rentable, app-driven, app unlockable. You pay.
Yes.
And they're motorized.
Yeah, and I'm seeing more and more individually owned scooters as well.
Yeah.
There's certainly a lot of weird micro-mobility devices like the Uniwheel or the remote control skateboard.
One wheel, yeah. The motorized skateboards are interesting, too, because it seems like how they lean can control the acceleration and stuff.
If you watch, they often have a remote in their hand.
Uh-huh.
I think the remote is the acceleration and the lean is for their turns.
Well, I have definitely seen people lean backward and forward in it.
To accelerate or decelerate.
That's maybe older tech. I don't know.
I've never ridden one, so it could be maybe multiple configurations of that. But the one that really drives me nuts is the scooters, and there's several things going on.
E-scooters.
E-scooters.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, let's make that distinction. First and foremost, the driver behavior is unpredictable. They are using these things on pedestrian facilities, and it's very clear that you're not supposed to do that on the little verbiage that's printed on the scooter. It says don't use it on a sidewalk. But there's not a lot of locations where these things are central, where there's roadway facilities that are convenient. And so designated parking spots for them are in sidewalk dense areas without near access to roadways. We don't know if you're supposed to use them on the shoulder in a bicycle lane, or you're supposed to use them in the actual lane of traffic. So there's a bit of user confusion, and people are just kind of wild west with it right now, going anywhere they want. And it feels like you should be able to, because it goes slow enough that it might feel safe while you're on it, but it also goes fast enough where you could occupy those facilities and it's not obnoxious. So that's one point. The second point is the parking. Once folks are done with these things, they just leave them where they stop. And I have personally flipped the bird. Of course, I'm talking about bird-branded scooters, literally flipping them over off of wheelchair ramps, near stairwells, or the middle of sidewalks. And I'm sure people have looked at me like, oh, look at that crazy middle-aged man having his get off my grass moment.
You're a fan of The Office, right?
I am.
So my wife couldn't watch that show, when it was on, and she'd have to leave the room because it was so cringy. And it is cringy. That's part of its charm. But I feel like that when we're walking and you see one of these scooters and you're flipping the bird and you're doing your thing, and I'm kind of looking around and see if anyone I know saw you hiding. I love it. It's this vigilantism that I love. But I do. I hide.
I'm sorry I've made you uncomfortable.
No, I think
I feel like anybody who's a friend of mine who spent significant time with me has at some point done that cringy look around for some reason or another. And I'm sorry, guys.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you follow up with some of these improperly parked.
So
right? Yeah.
I learned later, because I'm not actually a user of these devices, that within the app, there is the option to report an improperly parked scooter. And I'm not sure how this differs across brands. I know that there's at least 4 brands that I've seen: Lime, Spin, Bird. I'm forgetting one. Doesn't matter. I flip them all.
Yeah.
But you can log into the app, take a picture of the barcode, and take a picture of the infraction, and you can submit that to the manufacturer. And I was under the impression that there was some sort of like punitive action, but the last 2 times I've done that, I've received emails back from the company stating, we sent an ambassador over to look at the improperly parked vehicle and it wasn't there. Well, with the amount of foot traffic happening on campus, somebody picked it up, rented it, and moved it before they could dispatch a truck to come and check out the parking job.
Or even you took the picture, showed the infraction, and then you moved it safely off the side.
Yeah, especially like near a stairwell or blocking a wheelchair ramp, I feel a social obligation to correct that wrong so that other people that need those facilities who lack the ability to do that for themselves aren't burdened with that problem. So I find that to be problematic. And then the last thing I think is the safety component. And we touched on that with them using it in improper facilities, but each of them has a little stamp on it or a little sticker on it that says to wear a helmet when operating this vehicle. Where are we getting this helmet? Are there people walking around with a helmet that they're just carrying day to day until they maybe decide to ride one of these scooters? I've never, or I can't recall ever seeing anybody wearing a helmet operating one of these devices. So to me, that is just legal language. It's the CYI statement. They're just trying to protect themselves from liability. And they put this thing into culture.
They're doing 2 things. They're parking, or they're creating parking facilities in walkable areas where people aren't going to walk the scooter. I mean, sometimes they do, but
not often.
Not often. So they're basically creating pockets of usage for the scooters surrounded by, areas where there's a lot of foot traffic and it'd be dangerous. And then, like you said, they've got messaging about helmets, don't ride on the sidewalk, and yet there's really no feasible option for folks to have a helmet.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with the last mile problem?
Yeah.
Basically, within transportation infrastructure, especially for folks that are relying on public transportation, you can't be guaranteed that the bus or whatever public transit is in your area is going to be stopping super close to where you live or your final destination, where you work, where you shop. But it's going to get close. And there may be up to about a mile difference between your pickup and drop-off locations and your point of origin and destination. And so to solve this mile of, what you used to have to walk, all these micro-mobility devices are kind of popping up and suggesting themselves as the mechanism for in-between transit. And so it is something we should look at, and I'm not opposed to having these things available, but I do want to see either an education piece, which we're lacking right now, or I would like to see smarter policy, whether that's dedicated lanes for these things on pedestrian facilities, or maybe there's like a geographic barrier, because they're using GPS in them already. If they do that, then they can draw a boundary and say, okay, well, you can operate it, but you can only operate it at a 5 mile an hour speed until you get by the roadway, and then it'll go up to 20.
Which I imagine would kill their usage, and people would stop using it and find it less useful.
And I think that's the big thing, right? The math that they're doing is we want this thing to be used, and we're going to make it as useful for the individual as possible to the detriment of all those around them.
Yeah.
And that's the real gripe.
Yeah, and I don't know for the helmets, part of me thinks they could have inexpensive helmets, branded with the logo, and it could be one of those things where if you see someone riding around on their bike with a Lime helmet, they stole it, kind of like a social pressure to say, hey, keep these helmets with the scooter. I don't know what kind of a lice issue you'd have going on, but
yeah, but you could have a removable liner,
liner.
disposable liners, and then that would also incentivize people to check them out from certain locations. I think that could also solve the parking issue.
Yeah,
because if you had a small corral where you had to redock the scooter, you could potentially charge it there, so you wouldn't have to have folks come collect them and recharge them. You could have a helmet locker with a disposable liner. That would require a little bit more infrastructure. Right now, you just leave them laying wherever you want, and I've seen them on the median in a divided highway on Harrodsburg Road.
So we studied the spin bikes back pre-pandemic. They were on campus first before the e-scooters were popular, and these were literal bikes. They weren't powered bikes or anything. They were just a pedaled bike, and we saw a lot of the same issues. Where do you park them? And I guess they'd unlock and lock. That was the electronic component to it. But otherwise, you would pedal it. And I thought about the same things about helmets and others. However, when we were talking about the spin bikes on campus was interested in knowing where people rode them and also where they could park them. And they talked about putting in repair stations. So you could fix a flat, you could tighten bolts, you could have a helmet locker and things like that. So there is interest from the university to kind of build up the infrastructure, I think. So that could be, one way of looking at it, have all these e-scooters in one location with, I don't even know if there's any repair, but charging's a good point, helmets.
Yeah. It's my understanding, and if anybody's listening knows differently and wants to correct me, please do. But it's my understanding that the pilot of the bicycle program was used as justification for introduction of the scooters. And
so with the spin?
Spin.
Uh-huh.
And I believe that Spin, or whoever was advocating for a spin, made the case that these are like types of transportation, and you should be able to map usage patterns and behaviors from that one mode to the other. And that's also not true. So with bicycle, you're limited by your own ability to generate velocity. Athletic people will be able to go faster, but arguably if they're more athletic, they probably have faster response times to things. They may have more experience with that mode of transportation. I did a little bit of a literature review. This has been a couple years now, so this is a bit dated, but I imagine the trends hold. For folks that present in hospital settings, injuries are typically middle-aged men, often with alcohol involvement, not always, but lacking experience with this mode of transportation. And there's two things that make these distinct from a bicycle. One is the fact that it's got an electric motor, and that electric motor is capable of fast acceleration. So you're not having to build up your speed like you would with the bicycle. And that means that it may surprise you if you've never been on one of these things.
Have you been on one?
I have.
Okay, because that's my understanding, and maybe this is just the version I was on. It doesn't accelerate. It doesn't let you accelerate fast. You have to actually pump. When you go from zero, you have to actually pump itself, get it moving, and then once it's going, then it kicks in.
Yeah.
So I do think now, granted, once you're moving, you may be able to slow down and speed up accordingly. But
yeah, I did one time in Washington, D.C. They had dedicated lanes, so I felt safer using it. I also didn't wear a helmet, but I don't recall the fast velocity. This is just the capability of the devices, and it may be that the private ones are different than the rental ones.
Yeah.
But the other more serious problem with these is the wheel size and density. A bicycle tire, because it's large and because it's inflatable, is able to traverse cracks in the sidewalk or uneven pavement or a big rock, where you hit one of these things with a scooter and it can cause you to pivot and fall.
Hey, as a skateboarder back in the day, I could attest
Yeah,
to
you
that.
know all about that.
Oh wow, just a tiny little pebble in the right spot sends you flying.
I have several times on rollerblades made a commute that's about 1.5 miles from my house to my office, and same sort of thing. If there's a little bit of mud from a recent rain or a pebble in the roadway, that can be a real bad day really quickly. So if you're used to those sorts of things, if you've grown up on it, or if you're a pretty seasoned traveler with that sort of modality, I think you look for those hazards.
Yeah.
But in a rental situation, you might just be in a hurry. And if you're in a hurry, this thing looks like an attractive option to get from point A to point B very quickly. And if you've never used it before, being in a hurry is already a distraction.
Yeah.
You're not considering the environment. You're not considering the potential risks. And I think that introduces, for that individual, but also for everybody around them, a lot of potential for harm. And I'm waiting to get wiped out on campus by somebody going a little too fast, judging their turn a little bit wrong, because they just weave in and out of pedestrian traffic, and they don't seem to have a slower pace during more congested times.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be, arguing the other side, and I unfortunately can't, in good conscience, do that, especially being a safety person. But yeah, I see the same things with more usage. I think it's going to be even more prevalent, more increase the exposure. And yeah, now you can tell us as you're studying this recently here, but it can be really hard to code this information in terms of crash records and things like that. I know hospitals, have HIPAA requirements, so it's hard to get that kind of data. But in crash data, I mean, what do police officers think a scooter is?
So, yeah, I just finished a study on this, and we were looking at data quality. This was a 405 study for anybody that might know what that means in Kentucky. But essentially, we were looking at a unique way of looking at the data to see what we might not see in traditional ways. And so we took a machine learning model that was developed by Dr. Xu Zhang here at the University of Kentucky, and we adapted that model and we applied that to crash data, and we trained it on known good crashes or known positive crashes. They weren't good. No crash is good. But known positives, yes, a scooter is present. We did a SQL server query. We read the narrative. We confirmed that. And then we took a larger body of known no's and also fed that to this model. And then it read 160,000 crashes from 2023. And it picked out all the crashes that were likely scooter crashes. So it's using logistic regression. It's binning them yes or no. We look at all the yeses. And what we're finding is that in coding these things, people are all over the map. One of the most prevalent examples that I can recall is a narrative that says that an officer was on the scene because a vehicle struck a pedestrian. And then a sentence later, they are talking about the perspective of the father of the person who was struck. And he says it was somebody on a skateboard. And then a couple sentences later, the officer determines that it was somebody that was on an electric scooter. So now we have like multiple tiers, multiple levels of miscategorization, because according to national standards, micromobility is not a vehicle. It's actually a pedestrian crash. So there's not even a vehicle type, which is counterintuitive, but that's just how they want to classify things. And then it's going to be pedestrian using a form of micromobility. And the form of micromobility is scooter. And then the subtype would be motorized or not motorized. And that's confusing. Like, that's just really, really confusing. So people don't know how to contend with that when they're coding these things.
Well, it's especially confusing. I'm picturing a crash where it's Marty McFly, and he grabs the little wooden scooter that the kid's riding on, and he doesn't want the scooter. He wants a skateboard, so he rips the top off, makes it a skateboard, and then flash forward to wherever it was where he's in the future, and then he's got a hoverboard. So that police officer not only is having to deal with the time travel aspect of what's going on, but now he's got to characterize it as 3 different things.
What's interesting about that kind of jokey framing is that's exactly what we're dealing with, though, because you might have a police officer that's got 25 years on the force, and he's used to seeing skateboards. Mm-hmm. And these scooters are new, and he doesn't know what to call them. He didn't grow up with them. His kids never rode them, or the Uniwheel or the one-wheel devices.
Hoverboard,
which isn't even hover, but
yeah, that's what they call it.
So I think technology is going to always outpace policy. It's going to probably always outpace the law to a certain extent. And so one thing we're going to have to do is be a little bit more agile in how we are framing and consuming data. And if we can use common language like micromobility, then maybe we have to use some descriptive adjectives to kind of get down into the weeds of what exactly this thing is. But right now, about 50% of these scooter crashes were being categorized as either vehicle type or as just pedestrian, but not micromobility, or as other. Wow. And so if you or I, wanting to look at safety stuff, said, hey, how safe are these devices? Maybe somebody from the city of Lexington says, we're reevaluating our policy, we're renegotiating our contract, we want to make sure that the companies that produce these things are doing everything in their power to not create new risks for pedestrians or new risks for the users on roadways. Are they a safe device? Well, if we just punch in, e-scooter into SQL Server and we try to look at that, we're going to miss half.
Yeah,
and that's a big problem. So how do we solve for that?
You're going to miss some crashes that have scooters, and then you're also going to think you have a scooter crash,
but you may not
be. Yeah. So it's data quality. This is obviously a big deal in our line of work, and I think the biggest help here is improving the crash entry form, which we don't need to go into, but that's something we want to help with. Within Kentucky. But I think your other point, though, where I think where you could get the most action, I think in having the companies change anything, would be kind of at the city level in the permitting process. If they want these devices in the city, they have to negotiate a permit with the city and with the university, and that's where with the spin bikes we had a lot more control. We said, well, you can have your spin bikes here, but we want the data. So they gave us a feed of all the usage data and the location. You could get speed and time of day and all that. And
now it's a little black boxed because I asked these companies for crash data, and some of them were polite enough to tell me no, and the rest just ignored me altogether. Yeah. They don't want the liability because I have a feeling they know that there's no real way to spin this, but in a positive light if people are crashing. And one of the other kind of dark secrets about all of this is there's only going to be a crash report in a very small number of cases where there's a vehicular interaction, right? They're not likely going to call the police and fill out a formal crash report if it's hitting a pedestrian.
Sure, yeah.
Because there's no insurance company involved. There's no crash report. It's just going to be an injury. And so do we need to link this to hospital data and find injuries that way? Like how do we really understand the scope of this problem?
I mean, just think about the way hospital data is going to be entered. Their crash data has a focus on units and individuals, and we're having trouble identifying scooters. Hospital records, are dealing with everything under the sun. They're not going to have a very detailed personal conveyance field in there to tell you skateboard, scooter. I mean, they're probably going to lump them all into other, or
sure, and that's provided that they're even going to bother with how did they come here, because one of the emerging topics in transportation right now is vulnerable road users, VRUs. Mm-hmm. And I think it's probably far more convenient just to say, hey, a pedestrian was injured. Yeah. Well, they've got a traumatic brain injury. They may be, killed, or they may be an A-type crash. They're really going to focus on the medical portion of that, and they're not going to be so concerned with how the injury occurred. At least, I don't know. maybe that's not true at all.
Again, I think there's some data they want to know if they were on the job, on the clock. Are people using these e-scooters to deliver food, I wonder?
Like a DoorDash situation. I don't know that it would be economically feasible. I looked up what the fees were for Lexington, and the most recent data that I could find was $1 to unlock it, 15 cents per minute to use it, and the average ride costs around $4. You rented one of these recently?
Yeah, that actually seems, I wonder if the costs come down a little bit. That seems lower than I recall. I was considering parking at the stadium and then popping on one of these e-scooters to get onto campus. And at the time when paid for it, was like $6 or something like that. And I was going to have to pay it to get back. And that's $12 a day. I mean, it's like, that's not terribly feasible for this.
And so maybe that's the last part of the conversation there, at least in my mind. What's the economics on all of this? If the aim is to solve the last mile problem is going to exist for somebody that can't afford to have a car, or they're living in a situation where a car is not feasible, maybe like a downtown type situation.
Yeah.
And if you drive yourself to work, the permits here at UK are about $40 a month. And so I think that works out to about $3 a day if you're here on campus 5 days a week. $12 to rent the scooter is not the better deal.
Yeah.
Now you do have to take into consideration oil changes, gas, insurance, the cost to buy a vehicle.
But that would, the argument there would be, though, if you're going to have the car anyway, you could look at it that way. But yeah, and I'm thinking back when I was in college, I was working Subway to make extra money to pay for a car that I was then driving on campus and paying to park and all the rest of it. And my major professor asked me, he's like, well, what do you need the extra job for? I was like, well, I pay for the car. He said, what do you need the car for?
To go to work.
And then to go to work, he's like, just get rid of the job, get rid of the car, just stay on campus. And I was like, but I got to drive home to do my laundry.
Yeah.
For free.
No,
So
at the end of the day, I think that there's going to be a convenience factor in that decision. But if the goal is to reduce traffic in town and to provide more options, especially for low-income folks that don't have as many options, I don't know that this is a perfect solution. And if you're the guy that runs Spin, take into consideration the wear and tear when you've got some angry middle-aged man flipping your scooters over.
Yeah.
Plus, those batteries don't last a long time. I think you get maybe 3 to 5 years out of a lithium battery if you're lucky. And I think the life on the scooters is even shorter than that because people will treat a rental like a rental.
Yeah.
They're not driving them, caring for those things as if they were their own.
Right.
So I don't see how economically this can shake out. I almost wish we would just go back to the bicycles.
Yeah. But the powered bicycles are kicking in now too. And not only that, you can actually purchase devices to put on your pedal bike.
Oh, yeah.
It gives you a little extra
oomph.
So
I don't know the data on that one.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick with my one, get off my lawn. I don't need to generalize that too much or I'll be insufferable.
Yeah, it really is amazing how this technology that has just kind of, I don't know, really exploded, not literally, but
sometimes
maybe sometimes.
with lithium batteries, sometimes that is also true.
I mean, they're made by Samsung then, I guess.
Oof. Note 8, is that the one?
Yeah.
That they gave to all the members of Hamas?
Right. Wait. Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess we should say thanks to Spin for sponsoring this. Oh, wait. No, never mind.
Yeah. Thank you for not previewing the episode before writing the check. All right. Well, I don't know if we solved any problems, but I think it's a conversation worth having. And thank you for letting me air my grievances.
This was a vent. This is a venting episode. I didn't really want to challenge you because I mostly agree. So,
well, there it is.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Soapbox, Eric. How can people find us?
Well, conveniently, we put everything on our Linktree site. You can go to Linktree, search Soapbox Lex, and you'll find all of our socials there, plus ways to reach us, ways to engage, and some of our original content, so you can see some of the other stuff that we do.